Family to Family about strategies and stories to help us to be flexible and to teach flexibility. So stay with us. I made the webinar live, so welcome. I'm Chantai with Parenting Special Needs Live, and today we are going to be talking about, well, first let me ask a question. Are any of you, like some of us, dealing with difficulties of challenges, and since our world is so unpredictable right now, dealing with that? Because if you are, many of us are too, and we're going to be sharing, as I mentioned before when I was talking, from coast to coast, family to family, ways to teach each other to be, or help to learn to be flexible, as well as teach our children flexibility. So stay tuned with us. We are also brought to you and led by parents and professionals, such as Parent to Parent, Home and Community Positive Behavior Support Network, and Partnerships for people with disabilities, which is at Virginia Commonwealth University. So thank you. And as well, Parenting Special Needs Magazine, and also Positive Behavior Support is also joining us today. So thank you all of them for being here. And I'm going to pass the microphone to get us started to Marcia, because she's going to get us rolling. So Great. Take it away. Marcia from Parent to Parent, USA.
Yeah, if you could pull up the PowerPoint, maybe we could do a quick intro from each of us on the panel, just so people know specifically who you are and where you're from. I know, Chantai, that you did your introduction. Do you want to just go down the line here?
Sure, I think we should, yes.
Okay.
So Molly?
Then I'm up. I'm Molly Dellinger-Ray from the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia.
Hi there, I'm Marcia Quinn. I'm co-executive director for Parent to Parent USA, which is a national nonprofit. I live outside of Seattle, Washington, and I am the parent of two boys on the autism spectrum who are now 19 and 22. So I have some fun stories to share.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here today. My name is Tahra Cessna. I work with Positive Behavior Supports Corporation. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. I'm a parent. I also help to run a private nonprofit school for individuals with autism. I'm happy to be here today. I come from sunny Florida typically, but today I'm in Kansas.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Kern. I'm a professor at University of South Florida, and I'm a family board member for the Association for Positive Behavior Support. I got into special education because my son was diagnosed with autism, and then we've layered on ADHD and some anxiety. So kind of taking on those dual roles.
Hi, everyone. I'm Flip Gray, coming in from Virginia. I also work at the Partnership for People with Disabilities at Virginia Commonwealth University, specifically at the Center for Family Involvement. And I am also a mom. I have a daughter who is about to turn 18. She has autism, an intellectual disability, epilepsy, anxiety. So we run the gambit on things. And I also have a 13-year-old daughter as well.
Welcome.
Great. And Mimi's with us as well. Thanks, Mimi, for joining. So I think we're going to go ahead and start with the presentation. And I'm going to be really open and honest with you that I have not been the best parent teacher for my oldest son. He, being flexible for him and for me have been kind of a crash of the heads. But before we go into some of the examples about flexibility, I'm curious if you could just put in the chat box, what prompted you to come here tonight? So we can make sure and cover the topics that, that you're hoping to learn something from, you're hoping to share something about, you're hoping to find commonalities amongst us as parents in some of those. So if you don't mind just going in the chat box and putting that down. I think, and if you have an example, we'd love to hear from that as well in the chat box. But specifically, in what situations do your loved ones have problems with flexibility? So it's personal care, activities, changes in routines. So a lot of what brought us here today is, of course, the elephant in the room, the COVID-19, and how it's kind of made our norm a new norm in parenting, especially parenting individuals with disabilities. And the example that's I told the panel I shared with my friends is when my boys were young, and well, now it's still continuing, but I realized that they were extremely rigid in a lot of things. But one that has really shaped my family's life in not such a positive way is that they were very, very picky eaters. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. It kind of comes with autism and IDD. And I decided not to die on that hill. And I started making 4 meals every night. So let's take it back, 3 meals. So my husband and I eat together. And then the boys sometimes eat the same things, but not usually. So I don't know about you, but I still to this day am cooking that way for my 22-year-old son. And it's something that if I were to give advice or change something in my past and become less flexible and maybe more rigid as a parent, that I would have made that leap so that I'm not cooking all those meals. So does anybody else in the panel or on the call here have any examples of things that have affected you? You know, when things are behaviors and they continue over and over again, it becomes a problem, right? And so I'm just curious, is anybody else dealing with, especially with COVID, are you dealing with any specific challenges with flexibility?
We have a lot of comments in the chat right now. Flip, do you want to go ahead?
Sure, yeah. Facebook jumped right on it. I think this is one that many of us can relate to, especially with school-age kids, that after having a long time being in virtual classroom, one of our attendees' sons has returned back into the classroom, and he is really struggling and unhappy about it.
And I have Becky who said, difficult times changing in the change of routine. She is anti-mindfulness. So we're looking for new ideas. She's 8. We have Maria who says, I fear the future for my son who's 13. And she's inspired to hear our stories. Maria said transitions, anxiety, and negative thinking. Michelle says, my son is less flexible in stopping his online math games and less flexible when hearing no from his request. My daughter no longer wishes to leave the house. So we've got a lot. There's a lot of people who are looking for some solutions with some really big issues.
Yeah. So
I think a lot of what we're going to cover tonight and a lot of your examples are going to show them, these examples can be applied across all these different inflexible problems that we're seeing. So I think as we get into it, hopefully the parents can start to get some ideas on how they can use the ideas and strategies that you're bringing forth with their own loved one. And if not, we're always happy to stay and answer questions thereafter and help them out.
And someone, Flip says, from the Facebook morning routine and going to school in the morning. And Sarah Pfeffer's also on the HCPBS Facebook page. Is there trying to figure out how to share the HCPBS page. And maybe we will work on that.
And I think we should be back a slide.
Sorry. Sometimes when I click something, it just clicks the slide.
No problem. Keep going back.
Okay, sorry.
There we go.
The Venn diagram.
Perfect. So here, parents, we really want you to think about, what constitutes flexibility. Think about your everyday. What are the different situations that we come in contact with in our day-to-days that force us to be a little more flexible? Think about you set your alarm and your timer didn't go off, and you're late for work, and you have to really think about your coping and calming strategies, and how are you going to now navigate your day if it didn't start off in the right time. Think about the situations in which those skills are needed, and then what are the range of behaviors that you have to engage in that help you to respond to those situations. And for us as adults, we find that we've had practice in this. We know that it's going to be okay. We've had these, things come up in our lives, and we've been able to pull from that and use those experiences on our new challenges. But for our loved ones with special needs, they have that very rigid type of thinking. It's very hard for them to see the broader picture. It's hard for them to think about, well, I was flexible 3 days ago with this one activity, but I'm no longer able to be flexible here. It doesn't relate. So we're really going to help you to understand, with rigid thinking, how do we break that mold? How do we help them using strategies of the antecedent behavior and consequences to help them with this rigidity, with helpful strategies to get them through their day? And you can move forward. Thank you. So what we're going to discuss today, and the panelists are going to start, and parents, we want to hear from you. We want this to be a conversation that you engage in. We hope to be helpful for you. But when you think about the ABCs of behavior, we think about the antecedent, and that is, how do we prepare our loved one for upcoming changes? If we already know that our loved one is inflexible and rigid and has a challenging time when things don't go their way, what are we going to do to help prevent that behavior from occurring, or at least to reduce the intensity of that behavior? And then from there, preparing that environment, what are we then going to teach our loved one? How do we identify skills that are going to teach them to get through that, and then help them to generalize it, meaning that it's going to sustain across all the environments? So if I'm able to be flexible in the home environment, now I can be flexible in my school environment. Now I can be flexible at my cousin's house, for example. And then from there, how do we practice and reward the flexible behavior? And we need to always think about, after we teach that behavior that we want to see that takes the place of that rigidity, what are we doing to reward them? Such as, providing them tangibles, or providing them praise, giving them, a lot of reinforcement, and also redirecting them. Because we know just because we've taught them something, it's not always going to go that way. We know it's going to take time. So if they still engage in that rigid, inflexible thinking and engage in those behaviors, what do we do to redirect them back to the skills we're trying to teach? And so our panel is going to, break these down one by one in just a moment and help you all think of some strategies. And, at times we're not always successful. So they're going to share what has worked and what hasn't worked, and what they've learned from what hasn't worked. Because oftentimes that's what really teaches us those life lessons. So you can move forward as well.
We've got a couple more comments.
This is what we talk about when we think. Go ahead.
I just interrupt because we have a couple of more comments in the chat. Someone on Facebook is saying flexibility is not in her vocabulary. She's 15 and everything is a fight. Brushing her hair, brushing her teeth, getting dressed, bedtime. She has to get her way with everything. And then Stephanie added, I think first by mirroring the behavior you want to see by your child is a good strategy.
I think, Stephanie, you really nailed it. But as parents, we often say, it's watch what I say and not as I do. But we have to really be the model, because we're the ones that are teaching them, right? And also for Facebook, with the individuals, the 15-year-old, it's so important that they do have that autonomy. That is a behavior we see in those typically developing teenagers, the pushback, the kickback. They want that ownership. They want to make those decisions. So I think, in what areas can she have what she wants? Let's pick our battles. And in what ways is there, we can't hold back on this. This is a game. This is something that I can't allow you to get through with. So if you must brush your teeth, but maybe I cannot, you don't have to necessarily brush your hair. So think about the things that are a must and the things that are just would be nice. And choose your battles. Start with that. Shape them through those more important skills, and let them have the autonomy, making the choices as they would. If you think about the little changes you can make, such as, well, maybe do you want to brush your teeth first, or do you want to brush your hair first? Giving them the autonomy to choose the schedule in which they're going to perform those skills. And then what are you going to earn for it? What is motivating to us when we brush our hair is that we look good, right? We feel better about ourselves, and that in turn helps us socially. But if our kids, if that's not important to them, our loved ones don't really care about, those social impressions, then what would be the motivator for that, brushing of our hair or getting dressed with clean clothes? Think about those powerful motivators that are going to shape them into wanting to do this. And it sometimes is that extrinsic motivation that we have to provide thereafter.
Marita makes a point that I think, Laura, you're going to relate to. She says, my son has difficulty when he is told no when it comes to junk food in particular. He's now expressing his frustration in school by acting out. So those are what I'm getting in the chat.
I think we can all appreciate we don't want to be told no with our candy and our ice cream and our junk food, but we have to, everything is in moderation. So letting them know how much they can have and when they can have it and what they have to do before that. So if I want junk food, maybe I have to eat X number of vegetables or X number of fruits prior to getting that. And if I want more junk food, well, then I have to eat more of that, or I have to exercise. For every 5 minutes of exercise, I earn 2 M&Ms, for example. So we really have to think about allowing them to get what they want, but in a healthier way. So let's think about preparing for changes. This is the antecedent strategies. Remember that we don't change behavior. We change environments, and that shapes behavior. So the examples here, we're looking at a visual schedule, and this tells us what is going to happen throughout our day and when, and then some social stories. And the social stories really allow us, what should I be doing when I'm engaging in those activities? So I want to bring it to Laura. And Laura, I want you to talk about some things that you've done to help prepare your loved one for the changes that were coming up. When you knew that they were going to be rigid or inflexible, what did you imply to help them?
Well, I don't know if all of you experienced this, but that shutdown for COVID was a rude awakening. It was just crazy. So we went from him going on the van, and they took him to school, and he had his schedule and he had school, to like nothing, but he was still supposed to be in school. So we were really flailing. And if anybody else had any of those issues, please share with us, because it's good to know that we weren't the only ones feeling that. But what we ended up doing as a family was like, we need to put something in place. So we had like a whiteboard. I don't even know why we had a whiteboard, but we had a whiteboard, and we started to like write down like Monday through Friday, and tried to like put out like what classes he's in high school. So what classes he'd have to at least like do work for. He had assignments and he had stuff. So he had to put that in. And then when he finished a task, he'd go upstairs to his room where he had his space, and then he'd have to come back, and I was working, and he'd kind of check off when he had completed something. And then we'd check in and say, okay, like you did that, now the next one. And that was working. Then the school, of course, then decided on Wednesdays, they weren't going to have any classes. They had teacher time. So then we had to think of like, what are we going to do with a whole day of freedom? So we started to like brainstorm with him. He had to pick like something that I felt like was constructive, like do Legos or something like that. But we tried to let him like choose a little bit, so he felt like he had a little free time, but it still was within that schedule. So I guess I would ask, has anybody had any schedules that they were using, or like anything to deal with that? Like, that's it, you're in shutdown and you're not in school anymore.
Laura, I'll chime in. We absolutely did the same exact thing. It was a little bit different in the fact that my daughter was just super excited about being at home. And so being at home was a huge stress relief for her. It was the changing schedules. And as students went back to school and then they came home again, and, as COVID rates went up and down, we went through, I think we're on like schedule 12 of the year. Yeah. And so I've just worked with her teachers and adamantly said, we need that schedule, and we need some flexibility for a week or two while she readjusts. And as the year's gone on, the schedule changes don't bother her as much. She's more like, okay, here's another change, but you at least gave me the map.
have to do
That's
a
great.
schedule with Kaylee every morning. We kind of go over her schedule because she perseverates on what's coming next, who's coming next, what's going on. So we had to start sitting down and kind of going over the calendar, even to the point where I started having her write in the calendar because we just kept going over it and over it so much. So in order to get her to kind of have a schedule, some kind of a schedule, whether it's, since there was nothing for the kids to do. And even still, not very much. I mean, she's 24, so things are just starting to open up. So, but we still.
Did you all have to have visuals? Like, did the visuals help? Because when he sees it, it helps so much. When I talk, I swear it's like Peanuts from that the adults in the Peanuts comic or blah, blah, blah. Like, I swear that's all he hears. But if I write it down or like he writes it down, it seems to stick a little bit better. I don't know if you guys have had that experience.
Got a good example in the chat from Stephanie, and she says one thing that she learned from Mimi is that it's okay to show your child that you share the same feelings about transitions. For example, if I don't want to stop for something and I prefer to do something, I don't prefer saying out loud, I don't want to stop doing this because I'm enjoying this, but I can come back to this later when I'm finished. Having my child hear me experiencing the same frustration when transitioning can be helpful. I did that one time and my son said, me too. And we bonded for a millisecond, and it felt like a win. And Stephanie, did the same thing. My son used to have a terrible time losing a game. Like, it was like to lose a Candyland game was like, devastation. Mm-hmm. And so we had to practice showing him like, wow, I got the bad lumpy or plumpy or whatever it was. And so I've got to go back to the beginning. That really bugs me, but it's only a game, So we did the same kind of thing with my son. Michelle said, Chantai, people are having trouble hearing you.
Well, while you figured that out, I want to share tons of similar comments about school schedules and changes and adjusting to the school being at home are happening. We have one person from Canada who is just now going to start school at home coming up. But there was also a little bit different, but I thought this was worth sharing as well. Struggles with family members. This person has an only grandchild or nephew, little one on both sides of the family, and they are allowing him to get away with all sorts of things that parents do not typically do.
I was going to say, I think we have some in the chat too. See, we created with our ABA team a full day chores, academic, and self-care assignment a day to earn screen time. And then we use a chart on the wall that we marked with erasable markers. Those are great. I love the idea of adding in chores too. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, the sink is dirty again. And we didn't put that one on the schedule. So that's a really good one.
I love all of these examples. I mean, this is something that it's so important. We all have antecedent strategies that we use in our day. How many of you use your phone to see your schedule, right? We get in our car and we're checking our gas to make sure, do we have enough gas to get where we're going? Like, these are all prompts that help us to be successful. And so we can't expect that our loved ones wouldn't need these as well. And they need a little bit more at times than we do. So these are wonderful examples, everybody. And just thank you for sharing all that you're doing to help your loved one be successful.
And I'll just share one other thing. And this is a little bit like what you said, Chantai, is in the morning, you kind of go through the schedule. We did it the night before. When he went to bed, we talked about all the things that happened that day. Said we did this and we did that and we did this and we did that. And then we said, and tomorrow this is going to happen and this is going to happen. So that just kind of helped prepare in a really unstructured social story.
Yeah, Molly, that's A good reminder for me. So a couple weeks ago, my family took a trip with spring break. We went camping, and I thought, oh, this is going to be great. We've gone camping with the kids multiple times. My kids are used to this. Well, a week ahead of that, my eldest daughter started saying things like, I don't want to go. I'm going to stay with my grandparents. I was like, no. You're going with us. So we put her in the car. We're heading out. Every time we stop, she gets out of the car. She refuses to get back in the car. We finally get there, and it is pitch black. She has no idea where she is.
Oh.
We have to pitch a tent, and she's pitching her own tent. And I was quickly reminded that I should have considered how long it really had been since we had been camping. That maybe we've never pitched a tent in the middle of the night. Maybe I should have seen her cues and done some extra work. But now here we are. And my calm, meek, sweet child is screaming vulgarities at the top of her lungs. I'm trying to walk home from a place that was 2 hours from where we started. I panicked inside, and I used so many strategies. Some of them were just kind of shuffling in front of her to make sure that she wasn't, like I wasn't touching her, to escalate anything even further, making sure she was safe from getting into the road, talking to her, trying to keep my cool the whole time. Finally got her back in the car, allowed her to scream, cry, get angry, punch the dashboard even though I was saying, you might end up with the airbag popping. Let her have paper. She took the rules to the campsite, scrunched them up, and I was like, you know what, materialistic, we'll deal with it. And we continued on. It was probably an hour-long episode, but I finally got her to calm down. The folks that I was with stayed away, did not intervene, and I finally got her to come up and see the tent after it was up and ready to go. And she looked at it for a couple of seconds, asked to go inside. I was like, sure. She walked inside. She sat down, and then she asked for a sleeping bag. And I let all of that pent up frustration, out. I was screaming, someone give me your sleeping bag!
No! No!
End of story. We stayed for the whole week. Everything was peachy, but that was tough.
Wow.
I think we can relate to those vacation meltdowns when you think you have it and then you realize that how much, again, that routine that you have in place, and then how do we have those structures? That was a good example.
Yeah, and it really leads us greatly, into our next topic. If you want to move the slide into our teaching strategies. So, okay, we've prepared our environments. We've got these visual schedules. We've got the social stories. We're using our whiteboards. We're telling them the night before what to expect. But what are we really teaching? And we have to think about, if we've identified the problem and it's that inflexibility, what are some strategies that we can do to help really get them through? And at times, as I mentioned when we started, what do we engage in, the behaviors we engage in to get us through challenges that come up in our day, things that don't go our way? We're looking at coping strategies, acceptance, calming strategies, alternative behaviors. What can I do instead? So we want to brainstorm those solutions with our loved one, and we want to find one that we think is going to work the best for them, based on their strengths, based on their needs, and based on what they can really, engage in. And then we're going to implement that solution, and we want to make sure that what we're doing is working. If we see that they're engaging in that new behavior continually, and they're doing it without a lot of prompting, and they're able to stay on point, then what we're doing is working. But if you find that the frustration is still there and the behaviors are actually getting worse, then maybe we need to try something new. So I'd love to take it to you, Chantai, and say, what are some of the strategies that you've taught your loved one to help them with their, inflexible behavior?
All right, well, I hope you guys can hear me now. Is it better? I hope. All right, good. Well, what we do is, because like I said, she gets so she perseverates on everything. So when we sit down in the morning and go over that schedule, I'm now making her make sure she goes and writes the schedule out when we sit down. And then when she's perseverating, I say, go check out your calendar. So she's constantly looking at her calendar rather than asking me. So, and that I figured is good because that's teaching her to look at her schedule. We all have to look at our schedule to know what's coming next rather than going and asking somebody. So that's what we've been working on, so that she, and then we map out the whole week so she kind of knows, and then she knows what to do. You know, she can look at it every day. So when she asks me the question, I'm like, go look at your calendar. And that's been working so far. And then we also do it where if she asks too many questions, I might be going ahead of myself, but I'm just saying this part too, is if she asks too many questions, I also use our whiteboard with X's. And if she earns too many X's, she loses her whatever she's perseverating on, if it's going out with friends on Friday or meeting them at a workout thing or something like that, which is outdoors, you guys, or in so it's safe. But I kind of, she has to work and earn towards those things. So I went into the next one, but I think it all kind of ties in. So is that what you want me to
I'd
share?
like to join in on this. So like I said, I have two boys, and a lot of times my most challenging one is my older son. And so I tend to forget about my younger son, because I have some really good news to share with you folks who might have younger kids. That Cole, who's now 19, I mean, he had weekly cognitive behavior therapy, and he had a lot of negative self-talk. He had a ton of rigidity, anxiety. I mean, some scary things that he'd said that he wanted to do to himself. I'm not going to, your worst nightmare as a parent. But through his therapy, we were able to, one of the coping strategies for him was exposure to those negative thoughts. So he would have to practice those negative thoughts over and over and over. It sounded really scary, but it actually really worked. And then his therapist also gave him some other taped recordings of breathing therapies and things that he could do to calm himself down in a situation where, Flip, your daughter was not listening to you and couldn't hear a word you said because she was in this complete, they aren't listening. Like you said, blah, blah, blah. They don't hear what you're saying when they're in that heightened. And then, he surprisingly, the moral of the story is he left for college this past fall, and he's living independently in a dorm, and he manages his own money. He has 3 jobs, not that he has to, but he wants to. He is getting a 4.0. He doesn't have really any friends, but he does have some roommates that he has to share space with. But I just guess I wanted to share a little feel-good story that COVID has been really hard on my older son because he doesn't have any services. But on the flip side, for a kid who doesn't mind isolation, my younger kid, he's doing really well in college. And so I guess there's some positive, and what you're doing right now he has matured so much in the last year, and has a heart. I mean, I'm 10 years ago, if you asked me if he was going to go away to college independently, I would have said likely not. But a lot of the strategies that I did use back in the day were really helpful. So thanks for reminding me of that.
Oh, Molly, I think I see you talking and I don't hear you.
There's another really good example in the chat from Stephanie, who said her son was obsessed with being on time. If we were late to something, he gets very irritated with her. So telling him what time we have to be there helps. He's only 5, so he can't tell time, but he sees the big hand on the clock move closer to the number. He starts to say, "Mom, like, hurry up." And so that's kind of his coping strategy of looking at the clock and seeing the tick, the hands move to just really inform him logically how much time there is. And that's a strategy we all use. How many of us wake up 50 times on when we have to get the airplane at 4:00 in the morning, we wake up every hour and look at the clock. That's a normal anxiety reducing behavior.
I love that. One of the families that I supported, similar behavior, the individual just had to go the same way every day to school. It had to be that way. And if there was any kind of traffic that was moving them in another direction, or they were delayed in any way, it was very challenging. And we had a lot of severe behaviors. So what we kind of worked in on the ride was a mystery card. And that was that we knew that we were going to pass these certain streets. We knew we were going to pass these certain buildings, but sometimes we had to go a different way. And when we did, we could put that question mark in there into our schedule to say, oh, you know what? Look what happened. We didn't know this was going to happen today, but here it is. And today's the question day. So it helped him. He started doing it on his own, and he was able to then cope and calm, because, we can't always go the same paths, especially if we're taking public transit. We know what happens if things break down, and we don't want to have those behaviors in public like that without the support. So it's very helpful to, put things in place that sometimes things come up, and this is what we're going to work through.
I wanted to share that of all the 3 areas we were talking about, and I think we were talking as a panel that some of us were struggling a little bit with this, is that teaching, because I think it's been so easy once we learn the skills as a parent and it's working, especially when it gets into routines and kind of that rigidity, it's like we don't want to change it, because it's so hard when things are going well to be like, now let's be flexible. But an example is and I had shared this with some of you, is that we're dealing with that COVID weight gain, where he's not leaving. He's in front of a computer screen, and that includes the video games and the school, et cetera. And in the beginning, we were all stressed. So the food we were getting was probably fast food and not as healthy as we would be. So he gained a bunch of weight. We got all nervous because we were looking at maybe diabetes and all of this stuff. So I cut everything. I literally went through and threw out all the junk food, et cetera. I started cooking healthy. I started like freezing the meals. I mean, it was crazy. I took days off work to do this, and he lost like 15 to 20 pounds. And I was like, we've done it. We have succeeded. And he's the only one who's lost weight during COVID. But what happened was, after the holidays, I noticed he was going up and up and up, and he regained most of it. And what we realized was that we were not teaching him how to do it. I was doing it. I was setting that up, but we weren't engaging with him. We weren't talking with him. And like, I think somebody had mentioned that whole junk food thing, like saying no is a lot harder than teaching him how to do it. So just one thing that we did was he loves soda, and we need to cut back on soda. So my husband took him to the store, and he was able to pick out a bunch of flavored water, and he's trying them out, and he's like tasting ones, doing like taste tests. And if he likes it, my husband's talking about the calories and the sugar. And then if he likes it, we'll get it again for him. But we're trying to teach him to help manage that weight. Otherwise, I don't think that he'll ever do it, other than me going with him for the rest of his life and cooking for him. And I don't think that's the best use of time. So I don't know if anybody else has been trying to teach their kids something, or has realized that like they're doing so much that they're not teaching, and maybe to kind of step back and think about what can we get the kids to do so we're not always doing it.
I want to respond on that just quickly too, and just say, because when you said that the teaching aspect of it, because when we were talking amongst ourselves in this panel, it really dawned on me too that the teaching is huge, and that I think sometimes as parents, we get like maybe the beginning part where we kind of understand maybe what's causing some stuff, and then we go and we figure out how to maybe redirect, but we forget that teaching step of how are we teaching them to do it differently. Because I think it was Mimi pointed it out to me, and it was huge. It was like, oh, we get set in our ways with, if we do this and this pattern, she'll behave this way, and we stick with that. Like, for example, I'm just coming with myself. We have a routine where we all have to go to bed at the same time, or she makes us all nuts. But that's really not realistic. So we need to be teaching some different strategies. But it didn't dawn on me until, Mimi pointed out, like, no, you need to teach her. That's not what you do. We have to switch things, otherwise you're just allowing it to happen. But I think we get stuck in that. So I don't know. They keep saying my audio is really low. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. So you all, Tom, audio guy.
There's another really good comment in the chat from Michelle saying, and this happened with my son also, he gets really upset when he makes mistakes in doing homework, like a quiz or any practices. And we try to tell him to make mistakes to help us learn. And that's why he goes to school. But he doesn't seem to be able to take that information. And my child was like that also. The littlest frustration, and it was, I'm done. I don't want to do anything I'm not good at. And I'm just, there's no negotiation. Things are very black and white. You can do something or you can't do it. It's your A+ or your F. There's nothing in between. And that's really hard when you have that. And that is really I think that's a learned behavior from continued frustration and feeling like no matter what you do, you're just not going to succeed. So she's asking for advice about that.
And Mimi put in, she said she would respond by asking, what do the parents themselves do when they make mistakes, right? What do they say to themselves in those instances? Again, the modeling, right? We really need to be models for our children, letting them know that it is okay to make mistakes. We all make mistakes and nobody's perfect. It is so hard for our children to understand this and our loved ones. What I did with some of my families is I would have the individual actually make mistakes. We would maybe get out a coloring sheet and we would try to make the worst coloring page we could. I want you to purposely make this not look good. And we would make a game out of it so that they can start learning and seeing the imperfections and making it fun. And then saying, let's transition this to other things that we do. Also, setting up that timer. If we're perfectionists, think about the time it takes us to get everything perfect. But if I set a clock and say, I have to answer this question in 5 minutes, and I know that I can, and it's just going to be the best it is when I'm done. And if I do beat the clock, then I'm going to earn this, whatever it is. That helped some of my families to kind of get out of that pattern of perfection. But you've got to change it up. Again, we're redirecting them, right? And we're providing that reinforcement.
There's another comment that someone's daughter is almost 2.5, a toddler, and she gets really upset and mad and won't stop crying to go to someone's house or to the doctor because she's not used to going out because of COVID.
Yeah, and this is a preventative strategy. So you already know the behaviors, right, that your toddler is going to engage in. And so what can you do? And it's setting up the visual schedule, expectations, letting them know where they're going to be and for how long, because, all right, we have to go to this place, but how long are you going to keep me here? And we have to honor it. And we have to let the doctor know, like, my loved one can only stand time for this long. So I need to be out of your office by this time. I'm going to set the timer. We're going to work together and we're going to stay on point. Those are the kinds of things we need to do as parents. Go to the doctor's offices. And I've done this with my families when there are no other, like, can you let us go during your lunch break? Will somebody be there so that we don't have other clients in the room or families waiting, so that you can get us right in? We'll set the timer, we'll work together, and we're going to get them out. So think about making them your ally in making successful outcomes in the community. I think that is going to be so important. And again, reinforcing the behavior, which we're going to talk about in just a moment, is that reinforcement piece. It's so important.
Right. And also shaping the behavior. Just little steps of saying, look, let's just go in the front yard. We don't even have to go anywhere. Let's just go to the car and sit in it and then come back in. I used to tell my friend was working on a workout program, and I said, start with just driving to the gym. Don't even go in. Just go to the parking lot. So start really, really small.
I would agree with that because we're struggling. We did get him back to school 2 weeks ago, and I really was struggling because he wasn't leaving his room. And so we started to, my cousin's family had gotten vaccinations, so I knew that it was okay to kind of expand out a little bit. So we started to do family dinners, and then we started staying a little bit longer. And so he liked that, and then he liked the food, and he liked the card games. And then he started to realize he liked being around other people, not just mom and dad. And then we were gradually able to do it. It took us a couple of weeks, but then we were able to then say, okay, now school is next. And then we took him to school, and his special ed teacher brought him around. So, I mean, it was a gradual process, because if I went from like 3 months ago to like, oh my gosh, you are not leaving your room, to like, you're going to school the next day, like, it would not have happened.
I wanted to add in on the comment about kind of like do what works. So if you have to call the doctor's office and ask them, what's a time when nobody's there? I know part of our discussion is don't be so rigid about things, or stick with strategies that are unrealistic in the real world. But if that works at that time to help the child, and we were talking about a child who's a toddler, 2.5 years old, that is okay. Whatever helps to get them comfortable, you can work with that. So, again, I have an almost 18-year-old. I remember the days when our schedules were super rigid. I remember when meals were only Pop-Tarts, hot dogs, pizza, macaroni and cheese. And now she eats guacamole and sushi. And, the point is that as they grow, we as parents need to be mindful that we need to also help them adapt and stretch as they grow up.
Okay, great summary.
Yeah, that was a very good point, Flip. And that again is shaping, just as Molly brought up. We're just shaping, and eventually they're going to go into those doctors' offices when everybody is there. But we're getting them there in the baby steps. But this is bringing us now to practicing flexibility. So we've worked through the skills. We've identified what we want to teach. Our loved ones are engaging in those behaviors. Now, what do we do to keep it going? How do we help so that they're generalizing it across environments and they're maintaining it for years to come, even when we're not, explicitly teaching it? And so, Chantai, I kind of want to bring this one first to you. Tell me how you're rewarding your loved one for being flexible and engaging in the behaviors you've been teaching.
Okay. Well, I mentioned it a little bit before, but we're using that whiteboard, like I said, and then she likes to always be doing activities, no matter what they are, especially even with COVID. But actually, I hope my voice is better. Is it better, or sound? Can people hear me? All right. So we're using it as she has to earn her behavior by not perseverating and asking me 50,000 questions. She doesn't get those X's, and then she gets to go to an event of her choice that she wants to. So her reward is getting to go to the event that she wants to. And I know this is not necessarily on topic, but I want to bring it up because I think sometimes it's hard for parents to think, or it was for me anyway, to think of the rewards. But then it really dawned on me that it's the things that she loves that are really her rewards. What's good for her, and she loves going places. So that was it. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, very, very good point. You mentioned things like, what it wouldn't be what we expect for them to love. Maybe somebody really loves praise and giving high fives, but you see that every time you do that, your loved one retreats. They can't stand it. They cover their ears. It makes them embarrassed, for example. So how do you identify, and I'll take it to the panelists or anybody out there, what your loved one likes? How do you know that is going to be something that's going to reinforce that behavior? What are you doing to find that?
Yeah, we struggle with that a little bit because we had started with, if he did something, we had like a jar, and in the jar we had kind of like when you go to a dentist's office or doctor's office, they have those little tchotchkes that kids like to play with. So I was like, oh, if that works there, I'll try that at home. So I had a little treasure chest, and I would give him these items when he was really good and he didn't have a meltdown in like a public setting. But like, he had no interest in them. Like he just would leave them in the house. Like he would get them. He liked when he got them, but then he could care less about the object. And it took me a while, but what I realized, what he really liked was me talking to him and like saying, you did this awesome job and I'm really excited and I'm so proud of you. And I gave him a hug and a kiss. He would come to the treasure box for me to give him the hug and the kiss, and could care less about the items. So that was something that we learned along the way, was that he was kind of somebody that was going to take all those tickets and hoard them. But what he really wanted was that positive attention from a teacher or an adult, somebody saying, you're doing a really great job. The tickets and stuff were just part of that. But really what he wanted was from us to say, wow, thank you for doing that.
And I think also some public acknowledgement about your child if they're socially reinforced. Like Laura, it sounds like your son really likes that you approve and are demonstrative of your approval by rewarding him with hugs and kisses and verbal praise. Being able to say, like, let's call grandma and tell her what a fabulous job you did. For my kids with the siblings, it got to be a little bit tricky because if you were over too much praise for one kid, then the other kid would get upset. So you had to be careful about the kind of sibling rivalry with the verbal praise. But being able to call a long distance relative seemed to be a big thing, or to have them hear me talk about them to my mom or to my husband or something, saying, wow, you just wouldn't believe what a great job they did. Cherie on the panel says, I have reward boxes, 25 cents, 50, $1, $3. And her daughter is full remote and earns 25 cents for each 30-minute class. And then she buys her rewards that she picked out. I love that. It's very empowering for her daughter. Wow. Let's see.
And Mimi's asking, are we giving bonuses for flexible behavior? I think what we want to understand too is oftentimes I hear families say, I shouldn't have to provide this tangible reward to them or, this monetary reward, whatever, after they do that. They should just be engaging in it. But what we find is that's not always the case. And know that by adding these reinforcers, it doesn't mean that that is a forever thing. We're getting that behavioral momentum and we're teaching them that this is what we want to see. And over time, of course, we're fading that out. So, Cherie, over time, her daughter is not going to need the reward box where she's earning that money. But right now, it's getting her through and it's really teaching her what we expect. And so I think that's wonderful that you're doing that. And it's so important that we stick to what we say. If you have to do X, Y, or Z to earn this, that you truly have to engage in that and that we withhold that reinforcement otherwise. And, I oftentimes often hear it's a bribery. I'm not going to bribe my loved one or my child. And I say, bribes happened before. So if you enter the grocery store and you give them a cookie and you say, now you got to be quiet until mommy gets all her groceries, that's a bribe. But if you say you're going to earn a cookie and we're going to go to the bakery at the end of it, if you can, stay with mommy through this whole store, well, that's reinforcement. So think about when you're applying those strategies. And so we all need it. We all get reinforcement. And a lot of us are here for social praise, or we're here because we earn time with all of you. We're getting reinforcement from this. And I think it's so important we remember that for our loved ones.
Well, and I will share, I shared my bad behaviorist mom story before the chat started. My daughter had a really hard time with transitions, and she could never wake up without crying. If she took a nap and she woke up, she was crying. She just hated putting her feet on the floor and getting out of bed. She just hated it. And she cried and cried and cried and cried. And I said to her, the first day that you wake up without crying and come downstairs, I'll give you jelly beans for breakfast. And I think she was, we always struggled with eating a healthy diet, and she was so flabbergasted that I would do that she actually did it. She pulled it together.
That's cute.
You said that we naturally reward ourselves. I think that's important, whether it's at the end of the day, you go take a long hot shower, or you grab a glass of wine, or you go find a piece of woods that you're meditating in by yourself. We're naturally rewarding ourselves for a good day. Our positive reinforcement, I guess, has kind of transpired from the rewards, food, or gifts and things like that. Although some of that still plays a role, but more and more we are relying on wants and needs. So you get what you want after you do what you need. And having these conversations, you need to do your schoolwork. You need to do your chores at home. You need to be nice to your family. and then you can get what you want. And we allow my daughter the autonomy to be able to choose what that looks like.
Wow. Very good. Do we want to, are we, because we only have a few minutes left, you all, it's about 5 minutes. So if there's any more questions that,
Oops. Sorry.
that's okay. I was just
Am I
going to say
still
any more
sharing?
questions from the panel, or I'm sorry, from the chat, if anybody has any questions or any issues that they're having or dealing with that they want to ask the panel some advice on.
There's just one thing that I wanted to share that I talked about also just when we were having a conversation before the chat started, and I mistook a lot of my child's sensory integration behavior as a behavioral problem. And so she had a lot of really rigid and quirky behaviors associated with the clothes that she wore, the foods that she ate. And she was really sensitive to noises. And, the kind of kid that if you took her to the amusement park, she'd spend the whole time, crying with her hands over her ears because she couldn't wait to go home. And I am a special educator and a behaviorist. And I was saying, this is an extinction problem. We're just not going to reward this behavior. We're going to plow through it. And thankfully, when she was probably 6 or 7, an old friend came over who was in graduate school with me, who was an occupational therapist, and said, wow, she really struggles with the amount of sensory input that she gets. And it wasn't that it was a flexibility problem. It was a sensory integration problem. And it was my rigidity that was saying like behavior, when in fact, it really was not something that was within her repertoire to control at that point. So I just wanted to mention that before we end.
Yeah, that's a huge point too.
Another bad mom story.
Bad mom learning, right?
That's right. Michelle says, how about a son that's always telling us he wants to die or commit suicide when he's frustrated with homework, schoolwork, or boredom due to the pandemic?
I can speak to that a little bit just from my personal experience. My son threatened that on, I think, a total of 3 occasions, and it was in a situation where he was either defeated or he did not do well on schoolwork, like we talked about. And one of the coping strategies for him was to understand that it's not okay to say those things. It's okay to feel sad and frustrated and talk about the emotions that he's experiencing and be open with us with that. But that it's not okay to say, I want to kill myself and I want to die. And that really worked for him. And it really worked as he matured into his teenage years. So from a parent's perspective, I hope that helps support you.
There's a comment on Facebook. Flip, do you want to read that?
Sure. We have someone asking, my son dreads going to school. How can I help his morning routine be more positive? He's anxious to leave his home and we feed him a healthy breakfast.
That's, I think a lot of families struggle. Go ahead, Flip. Do you want to take it?
I was just going to say morning routines are one of those tools. And I think part of that is trying to figure out what makes a good morning for him. Does he have a loud alarm that annoys him, or does he prefer mom or dad to come and sing? Somebody ripping the curtains open and the sun's blaring in, is that what he likes? Or, and walk through all the steps of the morning to see what he likes best, what works well.
Yeah, and to add to that, what makes it exciting and fun? Like, If my kid can beat the clock and get out the door with doing, maybe there's 5 things that are a must. The other things are, I wish you would do, but these are the 5 musts you must do. You can do them in any order. I don't care. But if you get out of the clock, out of the house by this time, there's going to be a mystery motivator in the car. And I have a bag in there that's a brown paper bag, and you can reach in and pull one thing out. And whatever you get, you get. And that's because you made it. And if not, the bag's not there the next day. But, make it exciting. Build that momentum. What can they enjoy? Like Flip said, what is going to make them want to get out of bed and start their day?
I would also think about talking in normal times for the school, where is he or she going to? Because the special educator, if you have a special educator, might be able to like set up a time where they check in with her first. Or maybe he really likes a custodian, and then you tell the custodian, can you seek him out when he gets there? This is about the time that he's going to get there. Something to make him look forward to going to school. Maybe he, if he's in elementary, maybe he likes to color first, and he has a chance to like do that right when he gets in. So kind of like something to look forward to help with that transition would also help get them to want to go to school, depending on their age. As you get into teenage years, I think it gets sometimes a little bit more harder. You're not going to want them to color.
Right. I have a friend who said, her child had to have time to watch cartoons every morning. And before she went to school or went anywhere, she had to have her time with cartoons. And her mother said to me, and I thought this was such a pearl of wisdom, she said, cartoons are her coffee.
Yeah. So whatever works for them, right?
Yep.
That's right.
In the schedule. And we do have a morning routine article and even a download, I think, that's available. And it might be on home and positive behavior. Oh, I can't even think.
Home and community positive behavior support.
Thank you. And also on Parenting Special Needs Magazine, the article. So we'll put the links in underneath to this video as well.
Looks like we made it to 9:01.
Woohoo, 9:01. And we had some nice comments. Someone was like, oh, this is the best one they've had in a while. Can we keep it longer? So, well, I thank you all. I don't know if we're ready, if we want to take more questions or if we're ready to, we said an hour. I don't want to take up everyone's time. I appreciate everyone being here. So, and sharing. We want to go to the next, do we have any more questions, or we're about ready to pack it up?
We have a question in the chat. Was this little 2-year-old toddler she's so sensitive to loud noises and very picky when it comes to food. So how do I help her with those? And a lot of, that is very similar to the way my daughter was, who incidentally was not the child that I have who was diagnosed with a disability. Was the child, typically developing neurotypical child, who had all these really high sensory needs. And I don't think at 2 years old it would be a bad thing to consider occupational therapy. Mm-hmm. Food textures are a huge thing. The way it feels in your mouth, it can have a lot to do with eating aversions. And the loud noises. Someone else suggested noise canceling headphones, which wasn't a thing when my kids were little. But then of course they squeeze, and so you might be giving up one sensation for another. But I do feel like there's a lot available for kids with those kinds of sensory issues going on.
I would agree with that. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Go ahead.
I would say I would agree with that. We had used occupational therapy. At first, when he was in preschool, he was able to get it from school. And then we did actually do some private. He's actually a sensory seeker, so he seeks out the sensations rather than avoid them. But it's still, the occupational therapy really helped with that. So I would check that out.
And she says her only 2 words are mine and no. Which is, I think, very, very such a perfect 2-year-old. She's
Yep.
right on schedule.
So if your child at 2 is, has 2 words and is having sensory issues, I would recommend that you seek out early intervention in your state. I don't know where you're from. but it's part of your taxpayers' rights to have access to these resources. And you can contact your local school district to find out. It's called early intervention, and you can Google it in your state, and they will do an evaluation, preferably provide services in your home if she qualifies. And then somebody else asked a question about when did I start CBT therapy, and it was about when he was 8 or 9 when he started having negative self-talk.
I was going to add to the sensory issues. We went through a lot of that and still do here and there. One of the things that we did was try to make it fun. So if there was any way that we could make that issue that seemed really aggravating, exciting. For example, when my daughter was really young, rain, she wouldn't go out on a rainy day. She wouldn't take a shower. She didn't want anyone to splash her. She acted like raindrops were acid burning her skin. It was that significant of a reaction. And so what we would do on a raining day is I'd go out in my bare feet and I'd start puddle jumping, making little boats. And finally, she got curious enough after years of me doing it and acting a fool outside to come outside and play with me. And that's how we started to get her to come out and try and realize it wasn't as bad as she thought it was.
Wow. Well, I think we need to wrap it up because we want to be honor everyone's time. But I think thank you all so much for joining and sharing and giving such great advice and tips. I think this has been great and obviously needed. So maybe we can figure out a way to do something similar again. But thank you all for being here, and we will say good night, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Good night, everybody.